So thank you folks for joining us. We're gonna wait another minute. We're gonna start, at the top of the hour, and just to give folks a few more minutes to join us. I know we have people coming from joining us from different part of the US. But I can tell you the team here, I think you guys are in the DC, right, today? Because I'm in the DC area.
I'm happen to be in DC, but I'm finding myself less and less here, but it's my home base.
Okay. Paul, are you in DC today?
I am not in DC. I am in a not so sunny San Diego. It's funny, I work with a lot of folks on the East Coast, and your weather is better than sunny San Diego's today.
I was gonna say, because the weather is definitely getting warmer here. You know, and not only that, but we are getting more daylight. So that's, to me, that's always good.
I agree.
I feel like I have more, we were just talking about a lot, how busy we all get. But having the daylight certainly helps. So I think we are ready to get started. We're at top of the hour. So first of all, I wanted to welcome everyone to our presentation. We should have a really good presentation today. And really, the focus of today's webinar is fostering a culture of continuous planning is vital for long-term sustainability. So I'm going to do a quick introduction here. So quick introduction, I'm Boleyn Tran. I'm Senior VP of Financial Solutions at JMT Consulting. As I mentioned, I'm out of the DC area. I've spent pretty much my entire career serving and supporting the nonprofits with their back office accounting operations, leveraging various financial solutions. So I've worked with a number of ERP solutions, as well as budget management tools, AP automation, time and expense, a lot of solutions that are used by finance and accounting to improve their operations. And we are very fortunate to have two guest speakers with us today, Mike Gilman and Paul Preziati. I want to make sure I pronounce that right. So Mike and Paul, if you can just introduce yourself, that would be great.
Okay, thank you, Berlin. Mike Gilman, coming to you from Washington, D.C. today, coming from Fiscal Strategies for Nonprofits. We're a consulting group, CPAs, former public accounting professionals. We work with the CFOs, the C-suite on fiscal and financial strategies and sustainability education for nonprofits, which is an all-volunteer effort. The website encourages you to go there. We're putting up new information to help related to a lot of what we're talking about here today, sustainability, continuity, and that continuous messaging and such. Thank you.
Great, and happy to be here today as well. My name's Paul Preziati, and I'm a partner with Johnson Lambert. A little bit about our firm. We're a national CPA firm that provides audit, tax, and other assurance services to the nonprofit, employee benefit plan, and insurance communities. Myself, similar to Mike, work almost solely in the nonprofit space, love presenting at events like these, and also love giving back via boards. So, Mike, we have a lot to talk about today, and today's topic is a very pertinent one given our times. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, definitely. It's a different type of world right now, and I think Berlin, Paul and I are going to key on that word continuous in culture, and you don't usually see those two C words with finance, fiscal and financial. So I think everybody will really relate to that today.
That makes sense. All right. This is I have some housekeeping I wanted to just quickly go over. So if you have questions, please submit your questions in the question box on your control panel, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Actually, I will be monitoring the questions as well. And so as appropriate, I will bring it up to Mike and Paul. And today's recording and slides will be emailed to you following the webinar. I have one more slide on housekeeping. So there's requirements for CPE. Your participation today may earn you 1 CPE credit. To receive a CPE credit, actively respond to polling questions. You need to respond 3 out of the 4. Complete the survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar and stay on for the duration of the webinar. If you have any technical issues, please send an email or just send it through chat, and we provided an email here on the slide. All right, we just have a few slides to just talk a little bit about who we are. JMT was founded in '91 to help nonprofit achieve their mission. We work exclusively with nonprofit, just like Mike and Paul. You know, we are headquartered in Nashville. This is not all of our clients, but just to show you that we do work across the US, and we do have some clients also in Canada as well. You know, we serve over 2,000 nonprofits across the US, and then really supporting nonprofits' back office accounting operations with financial solutions and accounting services. Regarding our service, really quickly, as I mentioned, you know, we have 30+ years experience working with nonprofit. We exclusively, exclusively work with nonprofit, support and implement Sage Intacct, this as well as MIP. So those are the 2 ERP systems that we support, and we also implement and support a couple of budget solutions. Martis, there's also Sage Intacct Planning, as well as Vena. Our implementation team has diverse experience in both technology as well as accounting. We are dealing with, you know, accounting systems here, and provide client advisory and accounting services. Is another thing that we do. And finally, perform accounting operation assessment work. Just wanted to bring your attention to Innovate, which is a JMT user conference. Innovate is a 2-day annual conference for nonprofit financial professionals, where we bring together people, ideas, experience, and knowledge. You know, I think it is a great conference. You learn from the best and the brightest in the industry and gain insight into, you know, the latest trend and best practice. The conference is on May 5th through the 7th, and it is in Nashville. So it should be a great place to visit and should be a lot of fun. All right, I think, Mike, I'm going to hand it to Mike and Paul. I'm going to hand this over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Berlin. Paul and I are here, and you know, there's another C word we got to add to, you know, continuous and culture, which is connecting. And Paul, you know, today, right now, I'm coming to you in DC from an NGO that does international work, and we have a lot of new mention into this NGO, and really talking with them, and they're very intimidated by the financial process and budgeting, especially. And, you know, we just had a discussion today, a lot about what we're talking about, how, you know, it's the numbers without the backstory are meaningless, and the backstory without the numbers are meaningless. And it's really about reaching out and connecting. And I think if you look at this, most people don't relate capacity with budgets. They don't talk about how it impacts sustainability and continuity. And I think it's a starting point. So
Yeah, I agree.
Please. Yeah. Okay, Berlin next. Yeah, thank you. So Paul, I think as we go through here, we're going to hit our learning objectives in a couple of minutes. But there's a culture in budgeting, and organizations have a culture, and we have to keep the eyes open. And as I was preparing for this meeting with this NGO group, I was talking with the board chair a couple of days ago. And new board chair, very excited to get started and is moving ahead. And sometimes the staff feels like they're being left behind or something. We have to keep our eyes open, okay? And we can't just hide behind the numbers. So that culture and management styles are there. And then I think a big chunk of what we're going to talk about is how we assign budget responsibilities.
Yeah, and it's all about that culture too, and knowing a budget, even though it's a financial process for any organization, and especially nonprofits, it involves people throughout the organization, and you have to remember and realize how we integrate those people into the budgeting process through our culture who don't have the financial, let's just say the same level of financial competency. We have to think about that and approach that carefully.
Yeah, I
So
think
look at the bottom. Oh, go ahead, Berlin, please.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think culture is I agree, it's super important, but I also think that it's important that culture is actually established from the top. It has to be, to say that we're trying to establish a culture here to do, budgeting, multi-year budgeting, forecasting. But I think that that type of culture and also, collaboration, right? And connecting, as you mentioned, it really has to come from the top, whether it's, executive director or board. I mean, those are the leaders that's setting up the culture.
And Berlin, to pick up before we head out of the slide real quick, look at the bottom three real quick. And Berlin and I we have a long relationship, right, Berlin, going way back. Sitting behind the culture are the budget systems, the technology, those processes, procedures, and practices, right? And then how do we take the system and we gain, people's ownership, both at the management level, staff level, and the board of the systems. Next, please. Okay, so in the presentation, we're going to talk about the tactics, this ownership here. Next, please. We're going to move ahead a little bit. Okay.
So we
So
do have
Berlin, I'll
four
throw that.
polling. Yeah, we do have four polling questions. So this is the first one. So if folks can just take a few seconds just to respond to the polling questions. And meanwhile, I think we'll move because we have a lot to cover. I'm going to move to the next slide. The learning objectives. So really quickly for the CPE. So we're going to talk about creating a culture of budget projections and engaging staff, decentralizing budgeting, building process, documenting budget assumptions and true full costing. We'll talk about the benefit of multi-year budgeting. And then finally, examine how modern budget management tool can automate and simplify the budgeting and forecasting process.
Okay, thank you, Berlin. So there's some projections and budgets to me are really interesting, Paul. And I think of it almost like, I think people think when I hear budgets, they think about the process through the building of the budget. We're going to be talking about that. But I really think we can get the non-financial manager involved is through a projection-based process, looking forward. Each month, financial reports come out, right, Paul? Correct? Each month, we're going to do some sort of analysis off of that. But the most important thing is to use those reports to look forward. And I think that's the best place to introduce, like we were talking today with the staff here, that their job is to look, where are we at as the end of February we're looking at, and where are we going now? They're on a 12/31 year end. Where are we heading? And even 2 months into the year. And they universally said, these new staff, and they were very young, and they're saying, we don't look at it that way. We always thought about, oh, did I hit my benchmarks as of February?
Yeah, and it's not to minimize the importance of the benchmarks, but said another way, you can't change what's already happened. That's done. But you can learn with what from what's already happened and apply it to the future and know how what you're applying is going to change things. And that's why projections are so powerful.
Exactly. Next, please. So see this, the keywords there, it's a culture of projections, getting them into that process, and that the projections are helping them to do their job. So next, please. So there's three drivers here. Let's just get the three drivers out there, Paul, and then we're going to break each one down a little bit. But think about the three drivers, and Paul and I like to put them up there because they don't exist by themselves. So systemically, Berlin, you and I've relied on you on the IT, the technology behind it. We do have to have a core system. But I always like to say here, and Paul, cover your ears for a minute, our job isn't to make the auditors happy. Our job in these financial reports are for internal use, the board and all that. we want the auditors to be happy because we want people to be confident in the reports. But at the end of the day, it's for us, that these budget systems are built. And so I think the best way to design an accounting system, if I could start over, would be to look at it through the eyes of budgets first, and then through GAAP, general accepted accounting principles, compliance issues, the type of funding. But what are we doing as an organization? I always think that's number one.
I
And
actually agree with you, Mike. When I think about it too, you want your systems to support your ongoing operations and not to minimize an audit. An audit's great, an audit's important, but you need the business to run first. And that's what the systems should be set up for.
Exactly.
yeah, and one comment on the system is that you want to make sure you've got the right system, right? And one that works for the organization, because you have a lot going on. If you don't have the right tool, right? It's going to be very painful. So
And exactly, Bill. And you have to have confidence in the system. And people only talk about it when the system breaks down. Nobody ever says, oh, the system's working great. So I always like to say, us accountants, our applause is dead silence. Reports are coming out on time. They're completely accurate. People have complete confidence in it and all that. Hey, Paul, no one's ever come up to me and said, nice looking journal entry. But if our reports are late, there's an error or something going on, they're on us. So we need to make sure they stay confident in the system. Let's go to number 2, please. Okay, so now we have to connect these non-financial managers, okay? And I don't think most people are thinking about the accounting system and that all those processes through the eyes of the non-financial managers. And then can we go next, please? And this is interesting here. Not only are they connecting with the system, but they're using that information that's coming out to go down the virtual hallway and talk to their peers, their fellow managers and things, and planning and using it as a tool. Paul, I always think like we're doing a great job when they don't need us. The reports are coming out really well and they can use them.
Yeah, but to your point too, enhancing that sharing and creating that culture, that doesn't happen overnight. And that's what we're going to talk about. So you have to very thoughtfully think about that system, about how you promote it, how you quote unquote grade people. There's a lot of stuff that goes into here, even besides just creating the budget. It's how do you create that ecosystem where people interact with it and share information.
And I know we
So
spoke about this last month, but you're really working with non-finance managers, right? People that are, outside of the finance world. And it's also important, I think, to make sure they understand what they're looking at as well, right? You want to make sure that, and being part of this budget process, getting them involved will help them understand the numbers.
exactly. And not financial managers, everybody from board members, senior management, staff, even volunteers and constituents and funders are all part of this. So they're not the finance department. And by the time most transactions have occurred, that's when we see it as finance people. So let's go to the next slide and let's start to break down number 1. Okay. And we've touched base on these, but I think it really is important for us to go over that they're engaged with the financial reports. We want them to be auditable. We want them to be on GAAP. We want them to be in the right format. But if there's a lot of leeway we have in these financial reports to make sure it's fulfilling the needs of the users. Okay. And then, Paul, I think you always comment really well, but they have to feel like they own the numbers and versus forced, these financial reports.
Yeah, and there's a couple of elements in that. But the first is that you need to set them up for success and formally set that goals. And I know we're all not the biggest fans of evaluating, filling out performance reports, that sort of thing, but I have found if you make it a goal, if you put it in something that's being tracked, shockingly, Mike, things might happen. So that's one thing to consider as a part of this. Now, there's still a way to thoughtfully do it too, and you have to be a good manager, good team leader throughout this process. And while you're also giving constructive feedback, making sure you're praising everyone for the progress that's being made is a part of it too. That all goes a long way. But just setting them up for success as an owner.
Exactly. And I always call it the I and the we question. Individual finance, managers could be looking at pieces and we want them to take ownership of their pieces, but they need to keep an eye on the bottom line. Nonprofits are a compromise. If we could make money hand over foot, we'd be a for-profit. You know, there's for-profit hospitals, there's nonprofit hospitals, and they need to be aware of, and that's where that sharing of information starts in, is they're all and such. So next slide, please. So we want to share these progress reports. And I think some of this, Paul, I like to call it, there's lots of small teaching moments that are out there when it comes to this in the last part there, the delicate balancing act of how we're using our limited resources. And the balancing act is their individual performance. They take this very seriously, these non-financial managers, and they're intimidated by the numbers. And so we have to help them bridge that. And I think the best ones when you can have those one-on-one meetings and sit in between. Berlin, you know how many times I've seen you do it, where you sit down with someone and say, here's your numbers, not in a room with 30 people looking at them at the same time.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, you're still talking about people and emotions, and they need to feel secure. They need to know that you're helping them. And I find the one-to-one session to be extremely helpful.
And the one thing we got to avoid is, I always like to paint a picture, Berlin, is when you're walking down the hallway, you've closed the month, you got the financial report, and they see you coming, and it's like, oh my God, they're not looking forward to that meeting. And so reach out even before the reports come out, have talks with them and create those connections. So let's go to the next slide, please.
And one quick comment, I've worked with, CFO that made the comment saying, I send these financials out, I don't even know if anyone is looking at them, and so that's, you certainly don't want to be in that situation, right?
And that a little bit is this, getting these non-financial managers that it's their numbers. Okay, and the mini version of it is through the projection process. I always like to say, Paul, how long is a budget good for? I mean, these budgets are worked on really hard, right? 15 months, 3 months at least before the year starts, maybe even more, as we have talked in other presentations. So by the time you get to mid-year, those numbers could be 9 months old or even older. And I always like to say, but how long is a budget good for? It's good for 3.5 seconds.
Probably less.
Yeah, less now. And it's just, I gently remind everybody, and this is where the projection comes in, that a budget is a projection. It's just a projection you happen to have the board approve as a budget. But every board member knows, your dog knows, that you have a better chance of getting hit by lightning than every line item by the end of the year is going to be on budget. So they actually pay us through these projections, these rolling, to move the chess pieces around the board. It's and how we explain that. And so they own that projection process. I think if they get comfortable, looking at the March report 3 months into the year and interacting with the projection forward and how we can do these overrides and things on the budget and how we're moving the chess pieces around, they're going to be excellent budget builders. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on, because now they see how it works and that it's a moving process. Otherwise, they just keep looking at the budget as a benchmark, and I either failed or I did well. We can't have that. Next slide, please. So encouraging that sharing of information, that's not an easy task. That's where the culture comes in. And Paul, yep.
I was going to say, it's particularly pertinent in the times we find ourselves in now. I feel like everything's changing every single day. And yeah, I mean, there's probably a bunch of people watching this webinar who have funds from different federal programs or different funders. And it said very gently, it's variable right now.
So the more disruptive the environment is, the more we got to get out of our office and get in front of these people and don't wait for the reports to come out. So you want to have this interaction going on all months long. It's super important. And, making people feel comfortable with that. Next slide, please. And now here's where the one we alluded to a little bit early on, and we'd like to get some feedback from everybody, but we need, the system's working when you could see people using information out of the reporting system to have conversations with each other. Okay. There's two behavioral changes. When they see the numbers, they're reacting to them. And then if it prompts them to, go down the virtual hallway and talk with someone else about it and what's going on. And I think in nonprofits, you and I've talked about this, people aren't siloed unless there's a really super large organization. Everybody's wearing multiple hats. And most people are there because they believe in mission too. And so having these cross conversations, because I always like to say, I like to equate a nonprofit to an 8-cylinder car engine. The best nonprofits are running on 3. Because if we can run on 6 or 7 cylinders, we'd be a for-profit. We're a compromise, and we're there because nobody else is addressing that need. And so we have to get these cross conversations. And I think there's small teaching moments around these. And Paul, you and I have talked about this. There's ways to teach without people feeling like we're teaching to them. So at certain times of the year, like you're getting ready to start the budget process, or you want to break down, my favorite one is also break down the financial health on the balance sheet. And people might be uncomfortable with, revenue recognition patterns, right, Paul? And we have to do it a certain way to report under GAAP. And so getting that, just take a sidestep. And, let's talk about deferred income here. Let's talk about how we recognize grant revenues.
Yeah, no, and I'd just say too, the ideas for informal sharing are just that. And you have to figure out what idea works best for your organization. Maybe it's even an informal happy hour where you get through, Mike. That's not to say you couldn't have a beer and talk about budgets at the same time, but just based on your organization's culture, getting that environment so that information sharing is happening and that everyone has the vibe that it's okay to ask questions and discuss amongst the group.
Exactly.
And the tools does matter, because if you're part of the budget building process, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about documentation and assumptions later on in a couple of slides. But one of the things that at the end of the day, you've closed the book, you're getting the financials out, and then you're looking at BVA, right? These tools will help you figure out, why are there variances? Because it'll allow you to drill into and see not just your actuals, of course, but what were some of the assumptions that were made 6 months ago, right? That may have changed today.
Next slide, please. So this sharing of information is really critical. Berlin, I'm going to make a statement. The systems, the technology we get to work with is amazing, right? There's a lot of things you can do with it. But if you don't keep your eyes open to the people who are using the reports and interacting with it, you're not really taking advantage of the systems. And you have to assume there's a lot of, the boards change over regularly. And unfortunately, in nonprofit, the staffing changes over fairly often too. And I think you got to constantly look. So if we can get the staff looking forward, and if I could share one quick story here before we go on, is I was with an exec one time, and it was a decent sized organization, number of project managers. This project manager had about an 8 million piece of the budget she was working with, which was a good sized chunk of the organization. And she came up to me in the hallway and she said, "Hey, Mike, in such and such sub department, I want to adjust my projection $500. And the exec was standing there. And I said, "That's great. Good." And she walked away, and the exec said, "Oh, what a waste of time. $500 and I said, "Chuck," the exec, I said, "This is amazing. This person was not even looking at the financial reports a couple of months ago. Now in one of her sub reports, she's found $500. Look at the degree that she's looking at the report, and she's looking forward now. She's gone from not looking to looking forward, finding 500, and to me, it was like mission done, where the budget's working now. That's where the icing on the cake comes in. Next slide, please. So I think this is like a polling question. Bill, then we'll throw it back to you in the next one here. But I think if you're not answering yes to all 3 of these, that's where you need to be.
Right. So does your organization directly include staff in the assembly of the budget at the front end of the budget building process. I'm actually curious to see how people are responding to this. But yes, completely, somewhat, not really, not at all, or not sure. So hopefully, people are, getting they're getting the staff, the non-financial people that we talked about, get people involved.
And this question leads us into our next section. So as soon as this is done, we'll go right in, and because we're going to help you to answer this question a little bit.
Let's move forward. I know we're short on time.
We're short on time, yes. Okay, so 3 things we're going to go through in this section. We're going to spend just a few minutes on each one of these. Decentralizing the budget building process. Then we want to look at a quick example of documenting assumptions where it's really, I think this really shows up. And then we're gonna do a lecture on full costing and why that's important. So you can't, so often all we want to do is look at historical data and such. And Bulin, you mentioned this when we were doing our app earlier this week. It's like a lot of times these budgets are assembled away from the managers, the finance departments. And us finance people, we're not running programs. All we have left to rely on is history and run models. And again, I hate to say it, but my dog can run a model in Excel. It doesn't mean anything. Where do we want to go? And
Yeah.
so I think that's the key one that we have to change over here. So next slide, please. So I think the key way to get them involved, Paul, is to start with some budget training on the front end and have them prepare their budgets. And you need to do that by starting a little bit earlier and have a budget calendar out there. And you have the first draft, second draft, how you're working through that, and that these managers are involved. And Paul, I got this response more than a few times, but this one happened just about 2 or 3 months ago where I overheard a conversation in the hallway at this one organization. And the 2 people were talking and said, well, it doesn't really matter what our input is. Management's going to override it, or they're going to do what they want to do or something. And they lost the whole culture of connecting these individuals. I mean, there's some tough decisions that have to be made.
No, certainly. And you need to make it an inclusive culture. And you also need to make sure the budget is a living and breathing document. And I feel like a broken record here. It takes time, but you have to take intentional action to make it happen.
Next slide, please. So 3 critical drivers here, and you'll notice these are very similar to the other for the projections, that they understand the system, that they're involved with it, number 2, and that it's interactive and they're using the information. But remember, when you're building a budget, unlike the projections, that's going to take anywhere from 60 to 90-day process, and they have to all be connected during that. Next slide, please.
One other thing I just wanted to comment with regards to the system is that it's really important that that the system is user-friendly. People are able to adapt to the solution. Sometimes, these publishers will push a lot of functionality out, right? And at the end of the day, it's just, it's too much, right? So it's really important to if it's because you've got a lot of people using, some people are not tech savvy, right? And so it's got to be something that is, that's easy to use, that they can embrace it.
Yeah, and I think it's really important too when you're testing these systems to involve a variety of users in that testing. It's so natural just to default to the finance folks, but to all the points we're speaking about here, that's just a couple of users out of your whole organization. So make sure you consider that when you have your beta group for testing systems and include a diverse user set.
That's right. And so you could have the system with the most fancy, it's like the car that has the most fancy things in there, right? But if your people doesn't, if they get confused, what does this button do? What does that do, right? If it gets too complicated, right? They're not going to use it. So it defeats the point.
And as we said, on the very bottom, they're over-dominating the assembly process. We've got to decentralize that. Next slide, please. So this concept of this unfiltered in this selfish draft. Everybody has a different style. I don't like when you're going through 8, 9 drafts of a budget. I think there's first draft, second draft, and I like to get to final pretty quick, and it forces you not to kick the can down the road. The selfish draft is that, we turn it over to these project managers. And that's the one time they get to go back and take a look at the areas they're responsible for and put their personal stamp on it within the parameters of a strategic plan, board goals and things and such. But this is the place where they get to do that. So I like to call it the selfish draft. Okay. I used to call it, the wish budget and all that and type of things, but I hear I've used this, but you can call it different things, but to overemphasize that first draft of the budget has their input. And Berlin, Paul and I want to share a couple of templates. The time is getting short, so we'd like to move forward into that assumption process building here. And so building out the assumptions is critical. And we have an example as you're looking at this. But real change to a budget happens the 6 months or 3 months before the fiscal year starts, when you could start visualizing programs, how they could look different or something in here. And this is a simplified sort of template. Berlin, you and I have worked with lots of different budgeting software and different things and how to do this, but it doesn't fit on a PowerPoint slide. So Paul and I like to use this little template here because it's easy to read. But it gets people to start to look at how a budget, even within a year, there's inactivity periods of time. They start to look at the planning and such. And if you take a look at this template overall, what we're looking at here, if you look, is I like people to get in, what are they doing? The description, look in the middle. Then there's a plan of action. And then what are the key assumptions? And then you get to see, the monthly allocation of that budget. So you start to visualize the activity because everything's either front end or back end loaded. Not many things are, going on all year long. And it comes in here. And if you see this, for example, staff travel for the fall gala, no big deal. It's Chicago. Okay. You start to look at, and he said, we have 2 chunks of time. We have a site inspection meeting, and then we have the actual event. And notice it's different number of days, different number of people going into these. So we're looking at this, preparing for this budget. We're doing this in July when these time periods are happening sometimes more than a year later. And here's where the staff person can visualize, could we do this differently? Okay. Would there be a reason to overspend this budget? Well, maybe all of a sudden registrations were expected to be a lot higher. Maybe we need more staff there. Could it be that, during COVID, we had to cancel an event and we agreed to come back to this event? We don't need a site inspection meeting. We've already been there. Okay. My favorite one, Berlin, is, our members, if you're a member-based organization, or donors don't get to see staff. Here, let's bring more staff. And that will help us when we're doing, fundraising or things and such. So it helps them to look at these things and just, that salary budget, same as last year, this helps them to move off of it and think about, how they're laying their budget and how it's going to happen.
Yeah, and really how I like to think about it is, could someone with limited financial background read this and understand what you're doing? And if that happens, then I think you've documented it right. And it can be many forms. Like this worksheet's just one example. But having that trail there, it's going to be so helpful. Just throw aside understanding the budget. Think about when you're getting to the audit and explaining variances. Well, you've got this to start on what we thought was going to happen, and you can show it against what happened. So I know this is another thing we're adding to your plate that's time and effort, but this is one that I really do think is worthwhile to consider.
The
And
assumptions
many,
can
oh, go
always
ahead.
spend a lot of time on, and it's always we're here. But Paul, even what Paul said is exactly correct. And multiply that, you're into the year now. All of a sudden, registrations are way up. Now you get to go back to the sheet and say, wow, do we need more staff? This is great. We will overspend this budget and the organization will be net ahead because registrations are up 20%. And we need another body there.
And many systems make this process easy, meaning the process of documenting those assumptions. Because without the assumptions, it's very hard to figure out how did I come up with those budget? Why is there a variance, right?
Yeah. And then the last thing, it actually covers 3 fiscal years. You're preparing the budget beforehand. You're going to use it during the year, and it becomes your base when you're preparing the next year's budget. You go back and start to look, and it just constantly gets better. And people, I love when the non-financial managers say, well, maybe we can do this with less people, more people, do it a different way. And so, Berlin, let's move ahead to the full, to what I like, full costing. I think it's that you need to know the true cost of programs. Pausing for dramatic effect there, right? There's a lot of allocable costs in nonprofits, especially with labor, and there's not that many direct costs that go right into a program if you think about it, and overhead, and just all these elements. And if you don't know what the true cost of a program is, how can you ask for the right amount of funding? How can you set the registration fees and things? I think people understand that. Again, I've seen this hallway conversation. So why are we charging people $150 to come to this event? We only spent $20 on food and we got the room for free. Well, all the staff time probably wasn't allocated correctly or something, So they need to understand the full cost of a program. So, yep. So take a look at, so documenting this, Paul, you and I have done this when we've done a breakdown of, internal accounting control systems and such, but there's this unintended cost here, and Berlin, I'd like you to comment on it, that, any type of shared cost, it's easy for it to dump into the indirect pool.
Yes.
And it causes a lot of bad information to come out.
That's why a timesheet is important, making sure that people are and identifying the direct cost.
Perfect.
There
Okay,
are
let's move.
the tools will make, obviously there for allocations. A lot of the ERP systems have that allocation tools. The budget solutions also do it. You'll want to make sure you identify your indirect costs as you're budgeting as well to see, what is the expected, the fringe and overhead indirect rate, you expect during the year. These tools will be able to help you figure that out fairly easily.
Yeah, and
So
Mike and Bulin, we had one question come in that's actually pretty pertinent to what we're talking about from the audience. So the question was, what have you found are the best ways to get reliable revenue, specifically federal grant projections from those responsible? I found expense budgets are easier to develop than the related federal grant revenue. So this is kind of a multi-tiered one. If you're on what's referred to as a cost reimbursement grant or any other federal grant where you have to submit expenses to justify revenue, I 100% agree with you. There's no other way to do it. You're going to have to project out what you're doing for the grant and what you're going to seek for reimbursement. If you're in another type of environment outside the federal grant environment where you have activities for revenue that are easier to generate a projection, like membership dues, meetings and events, maybe you could take a different approach.
And that question really leads us to the last section we're going to talk about with the multi-year budgets and looking forward and such. So let's roll forward one more. When you do the polling question first.
So this is our third. Does your nonprofit organization use multi-year budgets to augment and enhance the strategic planning and sustainability? Yes, formally. Yes, informally. Or yes, both formally and informally, or no.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how people look at this. I think we're always doing something informally because we're thinking about the future. Really, Paul, I've always been a proponent of doing multi-year budgets. We don't ask boards to approve such. And Berlin, if you could,
I think we may be
forward, please.
Okay, we got you back, Mike.
Yeah.
I think there was some connection issue.
Yeah. So
I had a quick
about multi-year
budget.
Thinking about multi-year budgets here, again, this is something that's really important to think about, right? Because we never want to think about 1 year in a silo, and especially in today's environment, right? Like 1 year could be very different from the next.
And the big variable, as we all discussed, it's really the revenue. It's the funding that's coming in and such. And so to be able to peer ahead and look at like how these changes will impact planning. Next slide, please. So, and the next slide, please. So what you're visualizing, Paul, is as we've seen this over the last 6 weeks, right? All of a sudden we've got disruptions in the pipeline. And I think, the big key to multi-year budgets is to have a razor look at your funding pipeline, what's in that pipeline, and not just for the remainder of this year and the next budget year, but to look forward. And we see, and through those multi-year budgets, you get a chance to visualize, what we like to call best case, worst case, where things are going, and do some planning ahead of time. Otherwise, you're doing seat of the pants planning when a grant is pulled, where you haven't visualized ahead of time how to go through that. And we want to show you, a template and such. But if you move forward real quick, Berlin, we want to talk about this 1, 2, and 1, 3 right here. And I think it really helps. And you don't have a larger size organization to do this. That the 1, 2 is you always have next year's budget you're putting in front of a board and yourself, and pair that with a 2 or 3 year outlook forecast budget. Okay. And I like to say forecast budgets should not take a lot of time. And you'll see that on the next slide, please. That when you look out and next slide, please, I want to talk about this. So when you look out before you go to the example, it's always based on 2 or 3 key assumptions. I don't like it to have more than 5. I don't care how complicated the organization is that based on these 2 or 3, maybe 4 key assumptions, and 3 out of those 4 will always be revenue funding assumptions, because those are the big variables. We have a 3-year grant that's going to be ending. What does it look like if we lose that grant, if we keep half of it, or if we keep the whole thing? And that's going to get you your best case, worst case. It looks at, fundraising. Is it going up or down? What are our patterns to look at things? And if there's a disruption, and you could sort of look, and you want to be able to stare a board member in the eye and say, hey, we've considered situations where our funding has grown, and also situations where our funding might have taken a turn south. Okay, so Berlin, if you could show, we're going to get to this. So this talks about this 3 to 5. What's great about using just 3 to 5 key assumptions, when you do your rollout forecast, you could have just spent 8 weeks pulling together next year's budget. Okay, when you're doing the forecast, we'll spend maybe 4 or 5 hours pulling that, because it's just going to. We ignore things like inflation and things. Talk about, where's our funding going? Okay. And, how's our capacity through labor? So we look at, expenses, Paul, we usually look at labor, right? But it's the big variable as we look further into the future is figuring out where our funding is going to be. So we're going to share this last worksheet, and Berlin, we'll make it available to people. And you can move to the worksheet now. We'll show them that. Yeah, here we are. And such. Now, this is a little bit small, but you'll see here, and we'll make a variable if you can look closely at it, that we're looking back in the first set of columns to see, where we are currently. And the projection is green. So if you're in a disruptive time as we are now and been doing a lot of these, if we have 6 months, 9 months left in the year, what's our best case, worst case for our funding pipeline? And then we can roll out those key assumptions, what we'll list on the bottom, on the out years, and see how that plays through. And I think having something like this, it enables you to look in the middle of the page and see, likely case, great. Best case, okay. But if it's still, we could still avoid red ink on the worst case, It shows that we've figured out some sort of, what are our steps? But your steps are minimal if you wait till the funding is pulled and such. So it really helps you to look out. I like the one page. Paul, what do you think? I think it's a lot on one page, but I like how we can be able to, that green box on the bottom in the middle. And so you can put those 3, 4, or 5 key assumptions, and the messaging should continue through those all the time with the board. It's just around, we're a grant funded organization. We're honing in on the, where we see our grants going, and that confidence and trust that comes out of looking forward is really good.
Yeah, I like the one page too. Again, I think you're always going to you're more likely to keep your audience. I'm very much subscribed to the less is more approach. And I would even say too, like you can consider shaving off some of these items and putting more in quote unquote other. Again, you all know your audience, and we're all guilty of the Sally approach, same as last year. But this is the benefit of this presentation is you can tailor it based on what's changing year over year.
And Paul and I put a balance sheet statement of financial position in there, a mini one, but so people can see, because that's where you can see the health of an organization. If an organization that has operating reserves, they might be able to, absorb some bumps in the road that other organizations can't and such. And then the very bottom of the page, Berlin, us finance people need to step back. We need to get the CEO, the board chairs, put their comment in here, based on mission, this is where it's going and such. And our notes tend to be up on the right-hand side, in that blue section at the top, more of, problematic mathematical comments. But the CEO can be on the bottom. Okay, next slide.
So just a couple of comments. So I put together some of the common features of budget management solution. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to just pick and choose a couple I just wanted to mention. So pretty much most of these solutions are cloud-based accessible. So some of these, we're going to talk about one of the solutions we're going to talk about is an FP&A solutions, Vena. It sits on top of Excel. But if it's not Excel-based, these are cloud-based solution. All of these solutions will have an ability to do workflow management, which is super important. So as people are completing the budget, you need a tool that allows them to have a workflow in place for people to look, review, approve. The other thing I just wanted to mention is scenario modeling and what if scenario. Now, what if analysis, that's also very helpful, because as you're going through the budget process, you may have a need for scenario planning or scenario modeling, and these tools just makes it so easy, right, to take something and then just make a copy of it so that you can do scenario planning or modeling. And then some of these solutions allow you to do the AI and predictive analytics, which is very, very powerful, because these tools allow nowadays with AI, they're looking at patterns. They're looking at, predictions as to what we've seen. Certainly historical may not necessarily mean, and we just talk about in terms of what can happen in the future. That's why we need to have the collaboration in place. But having that tool in place to look at historical and provide some sort of an insight certainly wouldn't hurt. So why is budget management solution important? And one of the things that I've said is that if it's like this, if you need to go from one place to another and you've been riding your bike and suddenly someone gives you this car, right, that you can still use. I mean, it's still a form of transportation vehicle, right? Once you have these budget management solution and you're using them, you never go back to the manual way of collecting all these data and and merging all these Excel files together to formulate what does my budget look like at the end of the day. So the real-time collaboration among finance programs and the leadership team is really, really important. These tools just makes it so easy for you to do what we need to do with that collaboration. Increase visibility into financial performance, right? People can get to it anytime, anywhere, And also it allows, when you're looking at BVA, as I mentioned earlier, when you see that there's a discrepancy, you can see how you can get to that discrepancy. Why do you have that discrepancy? It's just something's happened that wasn't, anticipated. And that goes along with having those assumptions. So if you didn't have those assumptions in place, if you didn't document it, it would be harder, I think, to determine where your variances is coming from. And then also, improve accuracy by allowing you to provide that detailed assumptions that we just talked about. So what are some of the types of budget management solutions out there? And I'm going to break it down into two. You've got the sort of the FP&A, which is financial planning and analysis, or the CPM tools. These tools allow you to basically bring together not just the ERP data, but you may have data in other solutions. Like, for example, it could be fundraising. It could be if you're an association, you may be bringing data from your association management solutions, to have an insight into the revenue, so you have multiple cubes that you're bringing multiple data sources. If I have to compare it in terms of a pricing perspective, FP&A is generally from a pricing percentage, generally a higher price point. But I think organizations that do require FP&A will, they won't be able to live without it. You know what I'm saying? These tools do bring a lot of functionality to the table. And I just gave some example of some of the FP&A solutions that are out there. On the other side, the other type of budgeting solutions, which I'm saying they're not FP&A, they work, there's a budgeting tool, but they won't allow you to bring in multiple data sources and allow you to basically create cubes. These solutions, I put two of them out there, the Sage Intacct Planning and Martis. They do budgeting, they integrate with the ERP, they have workflow, but you're basically managing the budget within that solution, just really looking at the data that are coming from the ERP. You can add additional data in, but you're not bringing in a whole set of data from other systems. So given the time that we have, I just took some screenshots of some of these. This happens to be Sage Intacct Planning. This is their dashboard. It looks nice. You can drill right into it. I know Sage has its own dashboard as well. This is what the planning template may look like with Sage. You can't break the thing, it's well structured, and you just, it's set up for you to go in and basically key in budget data and key in assumptions. There's the personnel planning as well. So, you can drill into the line item details and basically provide details of how you want to build out the personnel budgeting. Just really quickly, and I know I mentioned about FP&A. This is an example of one that we work with. It's Vena. It's very popular. It's a tool that, again, you can see you have the connected dots here where you're bringing in multiple data sources. And there's a lot of power to this, being able to connect not just within your ERP, but other systems, whether CRM or HR system data, payroll. It sits on top of Excel. So we spoke a little bit earlier about usability and and the ease of use. I will venture to say there's a lot of people that budget in Excel. And so people are familiar with Excel. So if this tool sits in front on top of Excel, from a change management perspective, there's really not much change. They're still working in the same environment as where they are, Excel, except you've got a powerful machine that sits right behind it that manages the entire workflow process. So it's super powerful in terms of the functionality. I just brought in a couple of Vena templates. So you can see this is their budget template. And you can see up at the top, it's Excel, So again, this is the dashboard. And again, it's in anybody who, you can ask people, do you know Excel? And I can tell you almost everybody knows Excel. They may not know other tool, but they know Excel. So adaptability, it's very easy to adapt because it's a question is, how familiar are you with just working in Excel? Almost everyone is. So that was my last slide. This is polling question number 4. So it will pop up. So if you, just click a few seconds to respond to the last polling question. So, so this really concludes our presentation. I just wanted to mention, we are super active in terms of, getting content out to the nonprofit community. We do a good number of presentations. So these are a couple of upcoming presentations. We have one on PEO benefits. We didn't spend that much time looking at software, and that is because later this month, we have another presentation with regards to budgeting. It's collaborative budgeting, where we will look a little bit, we'll spend a little bit more time looking at software. We have another presentation, presentation on Build, which is AP automation in April. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that our Innovate, which is what you see behind me, the Innovate conference, is our user conference. It's in May. So if anybody who's nonprofits interested in learning more about whether Sage, or we have a lot of leadership thought presentation, sorry. It's a great, this is a great conference to go to. So our time is up. So first of all, I wanted to thank both of our guests who's joining us. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, Paul, for joining us for this presentation. And I don't have to, because I'm the presenter, I didn't see the questions, but if there's any questions that we did not respond, we'll definitely get back to you with answers. So thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks for your time, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.